Hey everyone, today I just wanted to introduce you to this concept of subdivision surfaces in MODO. Now, it sounds a little bit more complicated than it really is. MODO essentially has three types of polygons. The ones that we've been working with are called faceted polygons, and you can see that an object is in this faceted display mode by looking down here where it says polygons face. In addition to that, if I duplicate this item, we have one subdivision type called subdiv, polygons subdiv, and we have another one called Catmull-Clark, polygons Catmull-Clark. Now, this looks like a completely different shape when I first turn on a subdivision model, but I want to kind of show you what it's doing behind the scenes. So I'm going to go to this other scene that I have set up, and here we just have a bunch of different cubes, right? I'm going to actually hide half of these for now, or about half of them for now. Just turn off my eye icon. And we're going to look at these guys here. So first thing I'm going to do is go to edit, and I'm going to play with my subdivision options here. So for these top three, what I'll do is I'll leave this one alone. I'll do one subdivision on both of these. So I'll just go to options and I'll do a faceted subdivision, hit OK. And then on this one, I'll do one more level. So I'm just going to do the same option again, hit OK. And you see that it got split up into, each face got split up into four, and then each of those got split up into four. Now down here, for these two, I'm going to do the same thing, except in my options, I'm going to select this SDS subdivide, and that's going to essentially cut them all into four again, just like that. However, this time it's going to kind of average out where the points are on my surface. And if I do that one more time here, I'm just going to go to options one more time, hit OK. And you see it just smooths out my surface a little bit more, right? Now, let's do another example of this with the Catmull-Clark option. So I'm just going to delete these two. We're going to look at this cube, and we're going to go to options, and we're going to do a Catmull-Clark subdivision method. And you see these two are kind of a similar result, but if I do this one more time, options, Catmull-Clark, you'll see I get a slightly rounder object than I did over here. And it's just based on two different ways for the program to calculate where these points and edges average out to. We don't need to be too concerned with the math behind it, but we do want to learn how to use this. Now, the problem with actually doing these subdivisions is often that now I have so many points to deal with and to work with and kind of maintain. So the idea of subdivision surfaces and being able to preview these types of subdivisions without actually adding points to your object is quite appealing. So I'm going to actually turn these guys back on. Probably don't even need that many, but whoops, let me turn those on. Alright, I'm going to get rid of these two. And we'll look at these. So on these, we're going to essentially turn on the preview subdivision mode. So let's do this. We'll look at these two here. These are my Catmull-Clark subdivisions, 1.5. Sorry, this one and this one. And you can see that by, so I did the Catmull-Clark subdivisions on these, but they are still in that face mode, right? Because when you apply the actual subdivision, it's going to edit your geometry. But on these four, which I'm just going to move over, I'm going to apply the different types of subdivision preview modes. So to do the subdivision mode, when you're in face, you want to make sure you're in item mode so you don't just apply this to a certain set of polygons. All you have to do is hit the tab key on your keyboard. And actually, let me pause right here for a second. Alright, we're back. I forgot to turn on the on-screen keyboard, but yes, if I just hit the tab key, it's going to subdivide that object, and you'll see the polygons mode here will become subdiv. I'm going to do the same thing here. And you'll notice that right away it kind of goes to a shape closer to this one than it does to this one. And we'll talk about that in a second. These two here, I'm going to actually hold down my shift key and press tab, and that's going to change them into this Polygon's Catmull-Clark subdivision mode. And you'll see that here in all four of these. Now, when we look at the geometry, the edges and points here, we still only have the original 6 sides and 8 points. So if I go to my options menu, let me just zoom out here. O key for my options menu, I'm going to turn on show vertices always, and I'm just going to show that again. So we have a shape closer to this, but with less points to deal with, right? Now, a couple of things here. For all of these guys, if you look at their properties, under the section for surface, we have this subdivision and Catmull-Clark section. So the subdivision will say how many levels of subdivision I want to show in my screen and then on my final render. Generally, we'll be able to keep these the same. If you're trying to do something very high-end at the end of the day, you might need to increase the render level. Don't worry about that right now. And the same thing applies for these two objects here, where we're using the Catmull-Clark algorithm to subdivide, and those will use this level, right? So when I actually did a subdivision to my geometry, this would be 1 level of subdivision and this would be 2. So if I go to this object and I reduce my subdivision level, you should see it becomes a little bit more blocky. And if I go to this one and actually increase my subdivision level, it gets a little smoother, right? You can see this method kind of still results in this kind of squarish shape here, but it's just kind of because of how it calculates, and we don't need to be too concerned with it. If we look at these guys, similarly, if I drop the subdivision level for this one, it's going to go closer to that shape, and then this one is kind of close to that. However, if I increase this, it's going to go to an even rounder shape, and you can see that difference of this object and this object. If we select them, go to our surface properties, let's go here, make sure that's at 3 for the Catmull-Clark, this one at 3 for the subdivision mode, right? So you can kind of see the difference there. Now, from here, we have a couple of different ways to work with these smoothed out objects. So I'm going to show you that in a new scene. So I'm going to start out with a cube, and I'm going to hit Shift Tab. Now you can use the subdiv model with just the tab key. However, I find that especially when students are starting out, number one, the Catmull-Clark subdivisions with Shift Tab are kind of a little bit more predictable. And number two, if you do get into the advanced concepts of these subdivisions and how you can make sharp edges by controlling what's called a vertex map, the Catmull-Clark subdivisions will allow you to add weight to both the edges and the points versus the regular subdivisions, which I believe only do edges. So it's just a better kind of method and a newer method to use for this entire technology. So we're going to focus on that. But all the concepts here will be the same. You'll just get a slightly different result in the regular subdivision model. Okay, so a couple of things we can do right off the bat. We can turn on a few options to kind of see the original shape. If we hit the O key in our viewport, the active mesh section has this option for show cages, and that's going to show you where your original shape was. So if I hit Shift and Tab, you'll see that's the shape that I returned to. Hit Shift and Tab again, I'm in this Catmull-Clark mode, and I see kind of the smoothed out version of my model. There's also an option here to show guides, and that's just going to connect like a point from the corner, the original corner, to the new vertex, right? It can be useful. I find that it just makes things a little bit more complicated than I need, so I don't tend to use it. But if it's helping on like some complicated model, it's there. Okay, so I'm just going to turn show guides off one more time, and I'm going to start playing around with some of the tools that we've already had. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this polygon in the front, and I'm going to do a bevel. So I'm just going to hit the B key, and you're going to see that suddenly changes my shape quite a bit, right? Now the problem with this bevel right now is if we hit spacebar to get out of it, and we hit Shift and Tab. Well, first of all, if I do Shift and Tab here, you're going to get a really weird result like that. So you want to make sure that when you hit Shift and Tab, you hit 5 to go into item mode, and then Shift and Tab so that all the polygons change their type at once rather than just the polygon you have selected. Okay. So the problem with this model right now is that there are actually two surfaces here that are in the same space in 3D, right? Because I did my bevel and I didn't move it at all. So if I pull that out now, I have that extra edge, and that's going to kind of cause me some problems later on. So you want to be a little bit careful with that. You either want to, scale it down with the inset option in the bevel, or move it in or out using the shift option in the bevel tool. Okay, so I'm going to actually undo that bevel altogether. I think that should be it. Let me just make sure. Nope, a couple more. All right, there we go. Okay, so yeah, if I was to bevel this, I would want to just make sure I pull this out a little, and you can see that outside guide is changing, and that's always a good sign. You don't want things to overlap. Now you'll notice that I kind of have a harder edge on this side than I do on this side, and that's because when you're using these subdivided models, a quick way to understand it is that the more edges you have close to each other, the sharper that edge will be. And so another way to say this is that if I wanted to make more of a sharper edge, I would keep adding edges here. So for example, if I go back into item mode and shift tab out of that, if I go to my edge tool and use my add loop tool, and I add a bunch of loops over here, is that actually working? Not quite sure. Let's try that again. Yep, there we go. So if I was to add one there and shift click to reactivate the tool and add another one and hit shift tab, now you can see this edge is a lot harder and a much sharper corner than it was before, right? And if I go into this tool, and it's kind of interesting. So I'm double clicking on this green line, but it's gonna actually try to select that line. And that's another thing to keep in mind, that even though you have this guide on, this cage on, like the display for it, you're actually still selecting things here. So if I was to click on this line, it's going to select it, but you want to just make sure that you select stuff here to be certain where you are. And as I start deleting these edges, you'll see that edge starts to become kind of smoother. If I delete that one, a little bit smoother, and then if I was to delete this one, it's going to almost be my starting shape, except I'm leaving the outside edge instead of the inside edge. So it's pretty close, but not quite, right? I can also grab these edges and move them. You can see kind of it moves the outside edge and the inside edge, and kind of changes the shape, right? So you can kind of see here, if I move this past this, it's going to become kind of an inset cone. However, just like with our regular modeling, if we look at this right now, this is not a great idea, kind of like when we were talking about the extrude tool, where you have certain polygons that are in the same spot, specifically those two, these two on this side, and of course these two down here. So you always want to kind of inset or kind of scale things in. So maybe I grab this middle polygon and just scale it in a little bit, and even the slightest amount of scaling here will move all of those planes so that they're not in the same location, and give me a fairly similar result, but it will just be cleaner geometry that can be more useful later on. Alright, so let's talk about just defining a sharp edge really quickly. If I want to always ensure a sharp edge, what I can do is kind of create a corner with 3 edges. The way I tend to do this is I will take my polygon, I will bevel it out just a little bit, and then I will shift click to bevel again, and this time just inset it a little bit, right? And these 3 edges here, 1, 2, and 3 in succession, with the middle one being the corner, will help define a fairly sharp edge on my object. You can see that right there, right? And I can do this in this mode too, so let's do the same thing on this side. I'm going to hit the B key for that first bevel and just pull it out slightly. Then I'm going to shift and click to hit the B key, and right away you see it sharpens, but I want to make sure that it's slightly off so that it's easy to select and I don't forget that there are 2 points there, or 2 edges there. So I inset a little bit and now I have this really nice sharp edge there. Okay, so a couple of other things we can do here. Let's add a edge in the middle. I'm actually going to do this with my loop slice tool. My settings are set to 2, so I'm going to change that up. Set my count to 1 and set my mode to uniform so that it's right in the center. Now here, this is kind of an interesting use for the bevel tool. I'm going to show you this in the unsubdivide mode. Now, one of the things I want to mention here, because I found that I'm doing it without saying it out loud, I do like to go back to item mode to change my subdivision display type. But if I am in polygon mode, if I select nothing, remember that's the equivalent of selecting everything. So if I hit shift tab, that's fine. The main thing you want to be concerned with is that you're affecting all the polygons, not just 1 or 2. Okay? Because often what will happen, especially when you're starting out, you will hit shift tab, you'll unsubdivide some polygons, then others will be in the faceted or face display mode, polygon type mode, and you will just have this hodgepodge, and it's not really easy to clean up. You can't easily select everything and say change this to this mode. So try to keep it with all or nothing. Alright, so just a little trick here. I have this one edge in the middle of my object. If I want to make this into 2 edges, I can actually just bevel that edge and use my inset to split that out. And actually it will make 3 edges here. If I go to my tools, I believe if I drop this roundness level, nope, it still makes 2 edges. That's fine, you know, but it is a good way to like quickly add an edge loop, especially when you're working with the subdivided modes, because that way you'll have the edges where you already have them and just split them so you have more to work with. And for example, if I was to do that in my subdivided mode like that, grab this edge, I'm going to use my, sorry, not my loop slice, my bevel tool, split that into 2, and now I can kind of take that middle edge and scale it in using this blue circle here, and you can see it gives me this really nice and smooth scale. And if I wanted to make that a harder edge, I could grab both of these, bevel them, and suddenly I have this nice sharp edge over there. If I was to do the same here, bevel, click and drag, now I have a sharper edge there. And then if I wanted to grab these edges inside, now you see at this point it's kind of becoming a little bit more difficult to see with the guides on, or sorry, the cages on, so I'm just going to turn that off. And right here, if we look at those that we have selected, shift and tab, you'll see that they're kind of further out. So if I was to, let's say, scale this in, let's do it this way. I'm going to actually go to my side view here, or front view. I'm going to scale this down to the same size as that middle ring, around there. And now if I hit shift and tab, you'll see that's kind of giving me a straighter section there. And if I wanted a really straight section there, what I can do is grab both of these, bevel them out, just a little bit, right? And that's going to create that 3 edge section where it's 1, 2, and 3. And that will do it on both sides because I had both of them selected. Now if I hit Shift and Tab, we're going to get a very sharp corner over there. Okay, so it's really going to come down to controlling these corners and edges and getting the shape you want. Now, one of the interesting things here is that even though I've done all the smoothing, and even if I increase my subdivision level over here to get an even smoother result, you'll notice that yes, the shape is has my sharp edges and everything, but some of these edges are super curved, right? Like the actual kind of cross section of this object, and that's because I'm not defining kind of these corners here with 3 edges. I've only defined these corners, right, going this way. So this, all of these guys. I could probably press up to select them all. And so if I wanted to have like a hard edge there, but not as hard as it is in this mode, I could do that. I'm just going to ditch this guy because he's not really adding anything to my scene. But I'm going to select. Okay, so here, one of my first options or attempts might be to just bevel these corners as well, because they have the one edge, and if I split them into 3, I should get a sharper edge, right? I'm going to hit the B key and do my shift, splitting those edges out. And if I hit Shift and Tab, now you see I have these nice sharp corners that I didn't have before. However, if you look at this, we're still having these same issues where it's like polygons with more than 3 or 4 sides. For example, this polygon here has 8 sides. This one has 8 sides as well. So there might be some better solutions that we can try, one of which I would suggest is to just add an edge in the middle here. So I'm going to grab that right there, and I'm going to use my loop slice tool. And I'm going to do the same thing this way, so I'm just going to grab one edge and loop slice. And if I hit Shift and Tab, you see now I still have that hard corner on all the sides. And if I was to get rid of these, just so you can see the difference, delete, that's what I had before. So I'm going to undo that, delete, and I can kind of use these in combination with the others to kind of fine tune my object. For example, if I was to scale these, I can really control the corners there. But I can also say, let's select all of those vertices, right? And then I'm going to invert my selection with my open bracket tool right there. And with these, I'm going to say scale those in or scale those out, right? And it can give me really the control over either the centers of my circumference or the corners of my circumference. So I can kind of get really interesting shapes like this that would be kind of difficult to model in other ways. You do want to always make sure to watch out for your limits. So for example, what I just did there here is fine, but at some point you'll notice that this outside polygon is kind of hitting the edge of that kind of the inside edge. So I would want to go in and just select these few and kind of scale those in. And you'll see that at some point that won't really affect the outside shape too much, but you want to be a little bit aware of where your entire object is. And this is another time I would just go back and look at my guides to make sure my geometry looks clean. Okay. If I hit Shift Tab, that's another way. Now you will sometimes, very occasionally, see a little bit of artifacting like this when you're going back and forth. That's going to be okay as long as you know that you haven't actually deleted that polygon. So just be aware of that. It's not the biggest problem in the world. If you're really not sure, what you can do is just hit the F8 key, hit the play button that pops up on this window, and you see I do have a problem there. Let me smooth that out, and nope, no problem there. So this will probably be fine, and if it really isn't, we can always take a look at your model. But I think that's kind of a good place to stop for now. Um, I guess one more thing I can show you right now is this idea of edge weighting. Now this is a little bit more complicated and you don't have to use it. You know, I'm much happier with you guys kind of playing around with this how I've been because it's easier to see and visualize things. Alright, so I had a couple of technical issues there, but let's take a look at this again. So with an object selected, if I was to hit Shift and Tab to go into this subdivided view and just turn on Show Cages so I can see kind of where everything is going, and in this example I'm also going to turn on Show Glides as well as Show Vertices. Okay, so with a point or an edge selected, if I just highlight it and select it and I go to Vertex Map, Weight Tool, or hit Shift and W, that's going to activate my weight tool right there, and I'm going to hit the K key or that button to pull up this option. It's going to set that back to 0. Now the weight tool is not going to do anything in your scene until you click in the viewport to activate it. And now if I start to pull this, you'll see that the higher my weight count gets, the closer that point is going to be pulled to its original shape, right? Or its original location rather. In Catmull-Clark mode specifically, you'll hit the kind of the original spot, in this case at 20%, and that's because we're at 2 levels of subdivision. So for example, with the tool still active, I'm just going to change my surface type subdivision level here to 3, and now you'll see if I want to get back to that point, I actually have to reach 30%. And remember, if it's not changing, just click in your viewport to activate the tool on the current selection. So let's say it's at level 6, right? That's not going to change until I'm at 60%. Or it's going to change, but rather it's not going to reach that corner until 60%. And then if I was to grab an edge here, and this time I'll use the hotkey, Shift W, and click in my viewport to turn it on, and you see it right away changes. Now here the edge weight isn't quite there, right? It's not going to actually get me all the way to that that edge there, so you might want to do vertices for that, but yeah, you can actually control the weight for an edge as well as the vertices. Now the reason I don't love working with this is that if somebody else, one of the tutors, or I have to troubleshoot, it's not always the easiest thing to see which points have what weight. There is a way to display that here by selecting the object, changing your display mode to weight map or vertex map up here, and then you have to select which map. So you have to go to stats, vertex maps here, go to weight maps and subdivision, and that kind of shows which sections have what weight. But you can see even here, this point has a weight of 60 and it's not really coloring up, so it can be a little bit confusing for us to figure out. That's why I say for now start out with just using your regular tools. Don't play around with the weights, and if you get into a case where you're having a lot of trouble, let us know. We can probably add edges to kind of get the sharp edges you need, but if you really have to, at the end of the day, we can look at using the weights. Alright, so that's subdivision surfaces in a nutshell. Just know that it's a good way to work with less geometry to get smoother surfaces. If you run into a computer that's using an old version of MODO, there are certain shapes, specifically the sphere and the torus, which will actually, when you put them into MODO, they will come in the regular subdiv mode, meaning the tab key mode. So they'll look smoother than other objects. But if you want to use what we're using, Shift and Tab, that's fine. If you want to go from subdiv to Catmull-Clark, you actually have to hit Tab to go into face, and then Shift Tab to Catmull-Clark. or you can hit Shift Tab twice and it will still go back to face and then to Catmull Clark. Alright, that's it for this. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Thanks.